the basic questions that you ask relative to folks that are presenting as a risk of suicide. Most of the time, and I'm sure this is the case for most of you, when folks present as a risk, I don't try to find some clandestine way to work these questions into conversation casually. I'm usually pretty direct about them. Like I said, I wouldn't try to find some sneaky backdoor way to pull that off. I would be pretty direct and blunt with them as best I could be. But at what point, like what magic iteration of these questions do you go ahead with escalation to a higher level of care? There's not a solid answer there. For example, a client comes in and tells me, I've been thinking about taking my own life. I've been thinking about it a lot. I have rope, I have a ladder, and I have some rafters in my garage, and I know what to do. I have all of that ready if I need it. I don't want to do it though. It's why I'm here to see you. Like I want to find a way to not be so obsessed with that, to continue living and to be okay with things. In that case, I've got ideation, I've got plan, and I've got means, but I've got no intent. Am I nervous? Yes. Do I have enough there to start reaching out to hospitals and calling ambulances? Probably not. In that case, I'm going to have to do a lot of safety planning and make sure that everybody's on board with this. And then in addition to that, make sure that we are not just going to meet again in 2 weeks, but that perhaps I'll escalate the frequency of our outpatient meetings. So this is, I think, from a text at some point, just a short list of common predictors. And there's nothing here that I think would be terribly surprising. The things that are probably most important to note on this list: past history of attempts. Let me address that for just a moment or two. Of all the things that you assess for in your intakes, I would guess that that's probably one of the more important questions that you need to emphasize and ask correctly. And the reason being is that, if there is a connection between this and quitting smoking. Let me see if I can articulate that a little bit. If anybody here has ever quit smoking before, one of the best ways to quit smoking is to try and fail repeatedly. Like that seems to be the way that it happens. But there's patches, there's hypnosis, there's acupuncture, there's all these things. But at the end of the day, what seems to work best is trying and failing repeatedly. And the way that it works is that it seems that with each attempt that does not succeed, what Roy Baumeister would have called the muscle of self-control gets just a little bit stronger, in that your capacity to succeed next time has become a little bit more because you've brushed up against this now and you understand it a little bit better, and there's a better chance that you'll pull it off. Suicide seems to work in a similar fashion, in that folks that have had extensive histories of attempts, it seems like with each failed attempt, there's a greater likelihood of actually dying by suicide with the next attempt. So know that. The thing to note about that too is think now in your intake procedures, like where do you ask that question? I would hazard a guess it's probably one of the first things you ask the first time you meet this person. And the jury's out on how honest anybody is during an initial meeting like that. I wouldn't be. And I don't know many people that would run to that exactly. It's tough because, again, in some cases, I think people would assume like, oh, this is a neutral setting where a person is trained and designed to help me with this stuff, so that the chances of them, what would I stand to gain by not being honest with them? And for others, I think the approach is, I don't know you, I don't know who you are, not sure what this is. Once I feel comfortable enough to trust you, then I'll tell you more about what's actually going on here. So I say this to suggest that you would want to consider maybe revisiting that question in time, especially if more information becomes apparent that seems to suggest there might be a risk of suicide of some kind. And this is mortality rates. It's not, I put this in a presentation a couple of years ago. Now I lost the citation for this. So just I'm putting an asterisk next to that because these numbers might not be exactly this anymore. And also I can't point to where they came from, but in general, this is an expectation. Again, you'll note that previous suicide attempt is the highest thing on the list. And after that, bipolar disorder, not super surprising because, again, the impulsivity amongst that population is pretty concerning. Major depression, but again, the comorbidity with these things is also important to note. I think just while we're talking about other compelling stuff about this, I always notice that it's been really weird the last couple of years in continuing education trainings and the mental health community in general. Boy, we all hate narcissists now, don't we? Which is so strange. I just see so many articles and trainings about how to defeat a narcissist. I see all these message boards on Quora and stuff where they call people narcs. Like that's the shorthand term that they're using for this. So strange. But Yale did a study a couple of years ago where they found that looking at like the cluster B sets that folks that were identified as meeting the criteria for narcissistic personality disorder had a surprisingly high rate of death by suicide, and that it was very strange because we would think, like, why would someone that is so enamored of themselves do that? But the reality is, for most folks that meet the criteria for narcissistic personality disorder, they don't have, they're not like captains of industry. Most of the time, they burn through resources, friends, jobs, supports to the point where they eventually find themselves very much alone. And it's like it creates this ego threat condition where they have to reconcile like who they thought they were with who they actually are, and it becomes too much to bear. But again, just an interesting thought about like demographic concerns relative to suicide.